Welcome to the Kids Eating Broccoli podcast, where we believe that raising healthy kids shouldn't be complicated. Our mission is to inspire 20 million families worldwide to take the steps to raise the healthiest generation in our history. We'll interview some of the world's leading experts in nutrition, human potential, and children's health, as well as extraordinary chefs and foodies to gain insight into simple, fun, and creative ways to introduce natural health into homes across this planet. Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of the Kids Eating Broccoli podcast. For my guest today, I have Adina Pearson. Adina has been a dietitian for nearly 15 years in Washington State. She's a mother of two, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, who thought she knew plenty about feeding kids. I mean, they're just mini adults, right? Before having her own. But kids have changed her paradigm completely. In her excitement to help other parents make mealtimes easier and to raise healthy kids with a healthy relationship with food beyond her clinical practice, she started a Facebook page and a blog. She also runs a private child feeding group for parents, teaches online courses, and coaches parents via a virtual private practice. In today's interview, we cover a ton of really usable tips and strategies that parents can employ right away to make mealtime easier and to support their kids to have a healthy relationship with their diet, with food, and their health. Hi there. Well, welcome to another episode of the Kids Eating Broccoli podcast. Today, our guest is Adina Pearson. Adina, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so why don't we start? I always like to start these interviews by finding out a little bit more about you, letting our audience get to know you a little bit. So in terms of that, I'd kind of like to hear a bit of your story, kind of how you got to where you are today in terms of what you're doing and what you're going to be sharing with us.
Sure. Well, I'm a registered dietitian, and I've been a dietitian for almost 15 years. My career started in a hospital, so I spent a long time doing clinical nutrition in a hospital, so seeing patients that were sick in hospital beds or doing outpatient counseling, teaching nutrition classes and cooking classes and diabetes classes and kind of the whole gamut of what a dietitian might do. And I never really was interested in pediatrics. Part of the reason was because we were a small town hospital and we rarely had cases that were pediatric oriented. It was just a short stay kind of hospital. So that was part of it. But I also, before I had kids, I just thought it was either really, I wasn't interested in the real extreme medical pediatric side, but as far as just healthy eating, I thought it was a no-brainer. Like, what's the big deal? I had all of the book knowledge in my head. Like, you just feed kids healthy food and you don't feed them junk food, and there you go. You've taken care of it. And even after I finished my dietetics degree, before I started working, I spent a month taking care of my younger siblings while my parents were away. And I remember being so nutrition focused. I made them grilled cheese sandwiches with whole wheat bread and probably some kind of ridiculous low-fat cheese. And I added broccoli to their tomato soup. And they just looked at me like, what is this? They were so mad. So I tried to over-nutrition everything. And that was kind of, where I stood. I'm like, big deal. You just feed them healthy food. So what if they're picky? They're going to eat it. And then I had my own kids. And you know how that changes everything. You're the perfect parent before you have children. And I can't say that I had major feeding struggles with my children, but my first child was a long string bean. All the other babies looked round and chubby, and mine ate like a bird. And was long and lean. And so I worried, I thought, what if she isn't getting enough? And I went to this breastfeeding support group where you could weigh your baby before and after you feed. And so that's a really great way to get into your head and get worried over nothing. Like, oh my goodness, your baby took this many ounces and mine only drank 4 or 2 or whatever. And oh, look at your baby gained this much, And so I got a little overly concerned. And as a toddler, as most children do, they stop eating everything that they used to and they get more picky. And so it was about early toddlerhood that I started doing more research and taking more courses in child feeding. And my mind was open and I loved it. I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with the wonderful start you can give children when you feed in a responsive and supportive way. And so with that, because of this new interest, which was about 6 years ago, I started reading more, and I couldn't wait to share this with other parents beyond just the clinic that I was working in. So I started a Facebook page just because I thought, well, at least local parents, I can help them with this and help them struggle less with their children. And then I started blogging and then connecting with other dietitians and doing online courses and groups. And so it's just been really fun. I love this area of nutrition.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's similar in a lot of ways to my own story of my interest in kids and kids' health coming from having my own kids. Um, because it really lands it in a real way in your world when
Totally.
it's your own kids. And also when you see, and for me, some of it was the contrast of my own kids and then the other kids that I would come in contact with. And just the sort of need out there, that parents always want to do the best for their kids, and a lot of times they don't know how to do that,
Yeah.
and a lot of people I think go into parenthood, like you said, thinking, you just feed them good stuff. It's all, it's all good. Um, so very true. So, we connected a little bit before just by email and so forth, and I thought what would be wonderful is just to really dive deep into to the concept of how to work with as a parent, how to work with your own picky eaters, um, and so there's a couple directions we could go with that, and I'll leave it up to you in terms of that. My thoughts are some strategies or techniques or things we can do as parents to help make sure our kids are getting nutrition, to keep ourselves sane as the parent, but also maybe even some about why we get that, why our kids go through phases, even, because some parents I think are like, my kid used to eat really well and everything, and now they won't eat anything. What happened? Why did that happen? Um, so, uh, any of those things, whatever direction you want to go with that.
Sure. So I thought we'd start kind of like right before the typical picky eating happens. Most kids, as babies are very mouthy. They like to put everything in their mouth. And that's usually when most kids are very open to trying new foods. And they might even make like sour faces or whatever when you offer them something, but then they're eager to try it again. And that's really a great time to kind of taste train your child and give them exposure to a lot of flavors. Don't be afraid to use herbs and mix combinations of food. And I know there's a big leaning toward baby-led weaning, where you don't spoon feed your child purees, you just give them finger foods. And by finger foods, it's like anything they can hold. It doesn't have to be with their pincher grasp. And I think that's great too. And I think that there's a middle ground where you can give purees and you can offer finger foods, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. But that's really when a lot of that taste formation happens. But babies need a lot of calories for their growth per pound of body weight when they're little, when they're babies. And then after the age of 1, that growth really slows down a lot. And some of that picky eating just comes from that, because they don't suddenly need so much food as they once did. And they're not eating every 1 to 2 hours as they were when they were nursing or bottle feeding. And then there's some other changes that happen, so that there's this picky period that starts about age 2, give or take, sometimes in earlier toddlerhood. And by toddlerhood, I mean ages 1 to 3. That's generally what we think of as the toddler age. So around age 2, give or take a few months, kids hit this period of pickiness. And there's a lot of things that contribute to that. One of them is what's called food neophobia, which is a fear of new foods. But sometimes it also means that kids will completely reject what they used to love. Like my daughter, before that age, she would eat like a whole little kid bowl of steamed broccoli, just loved it. And then she hit that picky eating period, and it was like, what's broccoli? What's this green stuff? I don't want that. Other things that are happening is that little toddlers are wiggly. It's hard for them to sit still. And so, they may not be able to sit at the table for long. Appetites get really erratic. And part of that is because children really know how much they need to eat. They are more in tune with their bodies and their calorie needs than adults are. And so they may nibble, nibble, nibble and eat like a bird and then have this, eat you out of house and home one other meal. And they're really unpredictable. And so you can't expect, so our expectations make a big difference. You can't expect a toddler or even a preschooler. I hear one in your background.
Oh, do you? I didn't
You
know if
can't
she was coming
expect,
through the mic.
it's okay, real life. So you
Yeah.
can't expect a toddler or a preschooler, which is even the 3 to 5 year olds, to eat consistently meal to meal every day. It's just not going to happen. And so sometimes it's important, well, not sometimes, it's important to recognize what's normal, a normal part of development, so that you don't get worried over nothing, to just be prepared for that. And toddlers suddenly are not so sure about new foods or even old foods that they used to love. Suddenly they're looking at it with completely different eyes. There's also this big fight between autonomy, wanting autonomy, and then later wanting to please us. And so some kids are going to come to the table and reject everything just to maintain their autonomy, just because they want to do it themselves. I do it, even putting food on their own plates. And then their food preferences are really fickle. So just like their appetites are all over the place, they may eat 3 bananas for breakfast, and the next day they look at you like, you're holding a cricket in front of them. Like, why are you feeding me that weird yellow thing? So all of that is really normal, and it's important for parents to recognize that that's a normal part of development. You don't have to fight it necessarily. Well, not at all. But there are some signs and red flags of picky eating that's a little more extreme, that maybe has some other stuff going on. And so just because your child is picky doesn't mean there's a problem. But some red flags I would look for is, kids who accept 10 or 15 foods or fewer. Usually that's a red flag. And it might just be that they're more picky than average. So the continuum, between normal eating and extreme is quite wide, and so there's a wide range of normal. Another red flag might be that they are very brand and type specific. Like, I will only eat Yoplait vanilla and no other vanilla brand, or I'll only eat McDonald's fries and nothing else. Limited food groups. And that one's a little tricky because little kids typically aren't in love with vegetables and usually don't love meat and things like that because they're hard to chew. So that's, a fine line between what's normal and what's not. Usually if the onset of the feeding problem happened shortly after birth, then that's a red flag that maybe there's something more going on. Sometimes if during the solid food period, when they're just getting started with purees and stuff, if they have difficulty, then that might be a red flag of something. If there's a lot of anxiety or tantrums when presented with food, now that one's, you have to kind of tease apart, because some kids are just really expressive, right? And they're going to throw a tantrum anytime something's not their way. But if there's just something on the table and not in front of them and they get nervous, that's a sign that maybe there's more going on. Sometimes food allergies might be a reason. And obviously developmental delay, sensory processing disorder, or being on the autism spectrum. But the good news is that all of these kids can be helped by good feeding strategies. Should I go on? Or
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, that was going to be my next question. So if you see a red flag, what do you do? So it sounds like that's the answer, that you would jump into good eating strategies. But I think also you mentioned sort of that 2-year-ish age. That's when you're talking about where often we see this normal transition. Is that what you're saying? I
right,
just want to
right.
make sure we're clear. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So yeah. So I think it'd be cool to talk about strategies related to that development period. Um, and then also maybe touch on, if a parent is joining us now and their kid is 10
mhm.
and they're a picky eater, what are some strategies that may be different for older kids too? So
Great.
yeah, so
Yeah.
go on.
So, first of all, it's good to just change your expectations and not expect your child to eat like a grown up who's had, decades to learn to like food. Little kids are eaters in training. I mean, everything is new. They've only had a couple of years possibly of experience with food. And so one important thing is to not let their preferences dictate how you feed. And that would mean that you don't ask your toddler or preschooler, what would you like for breakfast? Or what do you want for snack, honey? Or, do you want soup or do you want grilled cheese? You don't give them that choice because you're the parent and you have to lead. And much of my um, feeding strategies are based on the work of Ellen Satter and her division of responsibility. And I think that is just gold and it solves so much. And so the division of responsibility, and maybe we can link to it later, says that we as parents have a set of jobs when it comes to feeding, things that we need to focus on. And then there's a set of jobs that children have, and that's where we need to let go. And so the parents' jobs are to focus on the what, when, and where. And that means we choose the food. We're in charge of grocery shopping and planning menus and putting the food on the table. We choose the eating times. And so it's not children begging and demanding food at certain times, but we say, it's breakfast time, it's lunchtime, it's snack time. And we lead with that. We put the food out and call them and help them transition to the table. And then we are also in charge of where eating happens. So it's not a free for all over the house, watching TV and snacking, but, we come to the table or a picnic blanket or, somewhere sitting and not distracted. And those three things make such a big difference because they take control of all the things that make sense for us to control. And it's based in authoritative parenting, which is basically parents who have, give structure and rules, but they're also warm and responsive. And so it's that good balance. You're not being a dictator and you're not being totally permissive and saying, eat whatever, whenever. But on the other hand, once you're sitting there with your child and the food is on the table, then that's when you get to relax and trust your child and their self-regulatory abilities, because they've got amazing self-regulatory abilities, out of the box. They know how much their bodies need to eat. And so that's when you let your child decide whether to eat and how much to eat. And that part's hard. And when you have a picky eater, whether it's a typical run-of-the-mill picky eater or a very extreme one, it's very easy to go in two extremes, right? So one extreme is that you're so worried that your child isn't going to eat that you'll just make them whatever they want. So if they have a demand, at least little Bobby is eating, So if they want grilled cheese, if they want chicken nuggets, that's what they eat. And here you are with your salad and your salmon and your quinoa eating that while your child eats something totally different. So that's one extreme, is just totally catering because at least little Bobby is eating. And that's, I can see where that comes from. That's not a bad parent. That's a parent who's worried and wants to make sure their child isn't starving. The other extreme is really rigid, where parents will start out of, again, fear and love and wanting their child to get enough to eat. They'll start to bribe or coerce or play games or force or some kind of pressure, where it says, this is what we're having. You have to eat, clean your plate, or you have to take 3 bites. And either of those has pitfalls, but there's a middle ground, and that's where the division of responsibility comes in. You can be firm with those boundaries of, these are our meal times, and you can be firm in serving, the foods that you want your family to learn to eat. And you can be firm about making sure that the meal time is a pleasant place, a non-distracted place, and it's a sit-down place. But then you let it go and you let your child choose how much to eat and whether to eat, and to maintain that amazing self-regulatory ability and those skills. Now, central to this is that, while the rigid parenting style that says you must eat this is also serves one meal, central to the division of responsibility is that you have to be considerate of your child. So if your child is incapable, at least in their eyes, of eating broccoli and fish, then you have to have something else on the table that they can manage, whether that's tortillas or rice or dinner rolls, something that they know they can come to the table and they're always going to find that relief, like, okay, I can eat that, and depending on the anxiety level of the child, you may need to have a couple of things there that they can eat, so that that table is a positive place and it's a place that they look forward to, and it's not a place of stress and worry and, oh my goodness, I can't eat any of this stuff. And so that's, I think, that the ultimate strategy is just carving out that division of responsibility and leading with your responsibilities, and then letting it go so the child can learn how to do that. One way I like to that this looks like in my house is that we serve family style. I don't know if you've heard of that phrase.
Yeah.
And family style means that everybody starts off with an empty plate, and the food pots and pans or dishes are all on the table. And depending on the age of the child, you let your child serve themselves from what's available. So you don't have to do this. You can plate some things for your child. But as kids get older, it really benefits them to learn how to serve themselves. And a lot of, preschools and daycare centers do really well like this. And kids learn, hand-eye coordination and the ability to scoop and share food and make sure everyone has some. And they do really well. With a 2-year-old, it depends on the child. Definitely, you can still help that child or bring the plate to each item and say, would you like some rice? Where would you like the rice? Would you like some of this? Where would you like that? You can help and assist and support when kids are very young. But by the age of 3, I think it's pretty reasonable to let your child serve themselves anything that's safe, maybe not a hot pot of soup. And also, you can put the food on your child's plate, but start with little portions and let them go back for more, of something that they want more of. I love family style because I think it reduces waste, because my kids are only going to put on their plate the things that they eat. And really, with kids, there's always going to be some waste because they can't predict in advance how hungry they're going to be.
Right.
So then you just work on reminding, like, just take one scoop and then you can go back. A lot of reassurance to know that, they're not limited that one scoop, but let's be polite and make sure there's enough for everybody. With family style, it's also really easy to do deconstructed meals. And deconstructed meals are basically something like a taco night where everybody puts their own tacos together, or baked potato bar where everyone puts their own toppings on. It could even be, instead of putting the sauce on the spaghetti, you serve it separately and let people choose, whether they want sauce or this or that on top. And again, deconstructed meals aren't necessary, but they're nice to have now and then to give your kids that freedom and autonomy to kind of feel in charge of what they're putting on their plate and what they're eating.
Yeah, I really loved a lot of that stuff, certainly, but two things I wanted to kind of circle back to and highlight a little bit that I was really appreciating in this whole thing is, one, you're noting and highlighting the fact that we have that self-regulatory mechanism, as little kids, like we come out with that. And that's really one of our main sort of philosophical tenets at Kids Eating Broccoli, is really that we all have that ability. I mean, just like everybody else on the planet, meaning like all those other animals out there, they already know, what to eat and how much and when to stop. We don't see an obesity problem among the squirrels in the woods or anything like that. And so we have that too. And that I love how these strategies you're sharing really help support that, because I think of it too, that the little kid you heard in the background is 2.5, and she's at that age, right? Where she's changing her eating and habits and all those things, and really, if you step back to the 10,000-foot view, if she eats broccoli today at lunch is not a big deal in the span of her life. But if she's supported to really listen to her own body, that's a big deal in the span of her life. And I appreciate that. That's seems to be sort of at a core level. And then, along with that, that the table is a positive place and not stressful.
Right.
And what a great thing that is to give our kids that gift as well. That eating is something, that all the things that go along with it, coming together as a family with loved ones, and giving your body nourishment and not a big stressful situation where there's a fight and so on and so forth.
Right.
So yeah, I just kind of wanted to circle and highlight those pieces because those really stood out to me, among all the other stuff too.
Yeah, thank you. I think those are so important because, all of us parents that happen to be health conscious, we care that our kids eat nutritious foods and get fiber and vitamins and minerals and all of that. But ultimately, whether or not your child eats broccoli right now at dinner or lunch isn't as critical to their long-term health as maintaining a healthy relationship with food, right? So you can force your child to eat broccoli or take so many bites, but that memory of the broccoli isn't necessarily going to be a good one. And when that child comes to the table, um, then it's going to be like, oh no, what do I have to eat? What do I have to eat this time? They're going to be resistant, and I see that happening a lot when parents of picky eaters get apply pressure, and pressure can be very subtle and it's very sneaky. Um, it can be praise for eating, but then you think like, really, do I want my children to be pleasing me with their eating? Do I want them to try to please others with their eating? And I'd say no. I want my children to please their stomachs, to please their appetite, because that's really important long term. They're not going to be cleaning their plate to make me happy. They're going to be eating as much as they need and being able to leave things on their plate. And that's something that a lot of adults I work with don't have that skill anymore. One woman I worked with could still hear her deceased mother talking to her, when she was, I mean, not really hear her, but she could still remember her voice telling her to clean her plate. I mean, and she was an adult woman, and that's hung on for so many years. And so, it seems like waste when they leave a few bites or a whole, 3/4 of a slice of bread, but it's an amazing miracle, I think, that they were so in tune with their bodies that they were able to stop right there. There was no, they didn't feel like, well, I guess I should eat a few more because my mom worked really hard. Let's push past my fullness to make her feel happy. That's totally not what we want. And with toddlers, that's not going to happen very easily. They're still at that really strong, like, I want my autonomy stage. Whereas when we get to 5-year-olds and older, we see that if you feed 5-year-olds more, they will eat more. But my hunch is that that only happens if they've been pressured, right? 5-year-olds who've always been able to eat only what as much as they are hungry for, they're not going to eat more. You can pile on the food and they're just going to eat what they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let me ask you about two specific things that have come up in other conversations or that I hear as sort of thematic things with some different parents that I work with. And one is with the little kids, the toddler age. What about kids that are really physically active, that is sitting in the chair for, even 10 minutes is a rare occurrence, for mealtime. Do you tell or talk to parents or counsel them to really work with the kid to stay there, in terms of the division of labor?
Mm-hmm.
Or how do you work with a kid that wants to get up every 3 minutes while the meal's going on?
Well, I would say that if a child gets up that often, they're probably not that hungry. And I would look at the
Mm.
structure of meals. So, how far are meals spaced apart? Are they nibbling constantly through the day? Kids 3 and under need to eat about every 2 to 3 hours. So, if they're eating more often than that, they're never going to be that hungry. They're going to always be sort of on neutral, like a few bites of crackers here, half an hour, a sip of juice, an hour later, a glass of milk, an hour after that, maybe they want a chicken nugget. So if you're chasing them around, feeding them all the time, they're not going to be hungry. But again, I would also remind parents that their appetites are less because they need less. They just don't need as much as they used to need when they were infants. And so I would trust their appetite and hold firm to that structure. So serve breakfast at relatively the same time, then serve a snack 2.5 hours later, and then, 2 to 3 hours later, have lunch. And if they have those 5 or 6 opportunities to eat, they're going to get enough. They're not going to be starving. And most toddlers break down by dinner. Like, it's so common for toddlers to just completely skip dinner. And chances are they've had enough that day. They've eaten at least 4 times. So it's not a big deal. As long as you can help them come to the table, if they sit there 5 or 10 minutes, I say that's good enough.
Great. Yeah, I mean, what a great way to take the stress off of everybody with that, instead of trying to battle to make them stay or come back or that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other one that I run into a lot these days is certainly speaking with older kids, over 5, so 8 or 10 or 12, who have really conditioned their taste buds by now, it seems like, or their taste preferences to only like really sweetened things. And so a lot of times I interact with families who are at a transition point where maybe they didn't focus on health in their family as much, and now they're looking to make those changes. And so what type of things can a parent put in place if they have a kid that's 8 or 10 or 12 who is very limited, maybe only will happily or without without a fight eat things that are like very sweetened or very processed or something like that?
Okay, good question. Definitely. And so I would still go back to the division of responsibility, but one principle that's really important when you're worried that your kids like the wrong food is to add on, don't take away, and provide, don't deprive. And so let's say your child is used to eating lots of cookies all the time. It doesn't mean you can't serve cookies. It just means that you might spread them out differently, and but you definitely still want them in there. And family meals are the best time to expose your children to new foods. And so it doesn't mean that you drop all the foods that they like, but it doesn't mean that every single meal has to be their favorite. And that's a skill that they need to learn, that they can make do with something that's not their favorite. Again, you want to be considerate. You don't want to put everything on the table that's foreign. You want to add on instead of take away. And so, with dessert specifically, what I recommend is that when you have dessert, everybody gets one portion with dinner. And that's really different than the way we treat the other foods at the table, right? Because we said, let your children eat as much as they want. Well, desserts are pretty rewarding for kids, and it's very easy for them to just kind of just eat cookies if you had a big plate of them. So, for family meals, I think it's reasonable to just restrict, I guess you could say, to one portion of a dessert. But then that does create a bit of scarcity in the mind of a child. You know, they might be like, oh, but that was so good. Can I have another one? Mom, why not? I want more. And so you have to give them an opportunity to enjoy that food with more abundance at some point. And the best time to do that is at a snack time, because then it's not going to interfere with dinner, especially if you space your meals apart appropriately. Earlier, I said with toddlers or kids under 3 to space meals and snacks about 2 to 3 hours apart. With older kids, they can easily go 3 or 4 hours. And there might be some kids out there that need more often than that, but in general, 3 to 4 hours is reasonable. So if they have a snack at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, they can make it till 6 just fine. And so that snack time where they get a whole plate of cookies, maybe a glass of milk or something else in there if you want to make it more balanced looking, is a really good time for them to learn to self regulate even when something's really delicious. And you'd be surprised how many kids like, oh, cookies, but then they leave several on the plate because it's not this forbidden food. They know they're going to get it again, and it's good practice. Um, does that answer the question about the sweet kind of things?
Yeah, I think it definitely gives some good places to start. And I would imagine that as kids get older, when we start to look to make changes, there's a lot of variables, more so than when they're younger, and what will work for each kid. I think that deprivation thing is a great point to really consider. I appreciate that. Gosh, I had one other question from that. Uh, well, anyway, I think that does answer it and give some starting points for sure. And so add on, don't take away was one of the things you've mentioned there. And
Mhm.
so, are you meaning if you have an older kid who will really only choose or typically chooses the sweetened things, that you give them that plus other things that are more nutritious?
Right.
Because
So
if they're
that
choosing
that's
their own,
yeah. If
go ahead.
so, choosing their own snack, you mean, or choosing their own
No, at
meal?
the mealtime, if you
Yeah.
provide several things and they're deciding which of those things to eat.
Right.
um
So with dessert, like a actual dessert, then you would just serve
uh,
one for
just for one,
everybody.
yeah, gotcha.
Um, but let's see the add-on takeaway. Let's say that you were eating white rice and you thought, well, I think I'd like to provide more fiber for my family. So we're going
Hmm.
to try quinoa or brown rice or something like that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it would be totally foreign and weird for your kids. Then I would say serve both, make a
Uh-huh.
little white rice, make a little brown rice. Um, if your kids have only eaten, chicken nuggets, then you might serve chicken nuggets for your first family meal if you haven't been eating together, along with this really healthy salad and maybe some kind of starch or grain that you like. So you're not taking something that has been like their only food away. You're just expanding and you're offering other things. And so it's no longer, this is your food over here, your kid food, and this is our food that we eat by ourselves. It's this is our family food, and I'm going to give a blessing to the chicken nuggets you eat, as well as this wonderful spinach, kale, you know, pomegranate salad that I'm eating, and this quinoa. It's all equal. It's all our food, and this is not something you say necessarily, but you expect your child that you expect that your child will learn. You don't expect they're going to eat everything at that meal, but you have expectations that they will learn to eat what the family eats over time, and it might take a long time. And I had a thought, something that happened with my son when he was 3. He sort of was this voracious eater until 3, so he hit the picky period a little late. um, but he would come to the table and look at everything there. Like, let's say there were 4 things. He would say, I don't like that. I don't want to eat that. Yuck, I don't want that. And I'm not going to eat that. He would stand up on his chair and point at everything and refuse it all. And I could have fought with him. I could have said, well, you have to try it. Just a few bites. Come on, just put it on your plate. You're not leaving until you eat this. No dessert. But what I say and what I have said is that's okay. You don't have to eat it. Just sit with us for a while, right? Because it's family time. And he would sit down. 5 minutes later, he would put everything on his plate and eat a little bit of all of it. Like, whoa. And I would say that's more likely with a more typical eater, a more extreme picky eater or selective eater, or a child with, and there's an eating disorder called avoidant restricted food intake disorder, and ARFID for short. And that's sort of the diagnosis for extreme picky eating, or a possible diagnosis. So a child with a lot of anxiety or on the extreme end will not turn around that fast. Don't expect that. But you can expect that they can learn to come to the table without anxiety. Once you've done that for a while, you can expect that they can find something to eat and that they will be able to choose something. And over time, they're going to branch out a little bit more.
I remember my question from before. That was with the desserts, having the one serving, which makes some good sense. What if the where you're entering is the pretty common sort of kid parent disagreement about, you have to eat a meal before you get the dessert. If the kid is not eating but knows there's a dessert, and it's been a pattern, at least in the parent's mind, that when they know there's a dessert coming, they'll not eat their other food and just eat the dessert. How do you where do you stand on that, or how do you counsel a parent with that if they're coming to you with that being the problem?
Right, that they won't eat because they're waiting for this dessert to come.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So what I recommend is that parents serve the dessert at the same time as the meal. So a cookie by everybody's plate. And some parents are like, what? But no way. That's like so unhealthy. Like, what if that's all they eat? And to that, I say, if a child has an appetite, they're not going to be satisfied with just a cookie. They will eat other foods. And I've seen my own kids nibble at the cookie and nibble at the main meal and go back to the cookie. Sometimes they eat the cookie first. Sometimes the cookie is just something that helps the child feel relaxed at the table because they see that right away. That doesn't mean you have to serve dessert every night. I mean, this has to fit your personal values. And if you want to serve dessert every night, I don't see a problem with that because it can be small. If you want to serve it once or twice a week, that's totally up to you, but it's not a cookie or a chocolate kiss or something like that is not going to adversely affect their appetite or health. And it's not going to hurt their eating if there's not something deeper going on that's causing them to be picky.
Gotcha. Great. That's great. Simple, but we'll do the trick for sure. So what I keep getting also, as I'm kind of jotting down some notes here, listening to, one of the themes that seems throughout is really looking at the sort of the big picture or the long game, with the child and their eating. And I think often the aggravation or the frustration that can come up with parents is because we get really, we zoom in, and And it's like this meal, they need to eat this, where it's, how you're saying, like your son had that experience where he would say he didn't like any of those things. And if we were so worried about that meal, if you had been so worried about that particular meal, it, you would have responded in a different way and never allowed for even that 5 minutes later where he starts eating the things, let alone a kid who's going to take, maybe days or weeks to get to that point where they relax enough to eat that, especially depending on what their history has been, if we're starting to make these changes as they get older, obviously, and all of these changes, if we can start early, the earlier
Oh,
the
yeah.
perhaps easier it'll be. And of course, as parents, we are where we are, and that
Hmm.
we're always doing the best we can.
Absolutely.
So so I guess I have sort of two things. One would be, it sounds like these are great ways to go. And if you find that you're really trying these things and it's not making a difference, even in a longer term thing, is that when you might suggest somebody find like an expert to work with specifically, because they're finding even in instituting these things, they're still having a lot of difficulty with eating with their kids. How would we know? That's, I guess, my question. How would we know it's time to employ an expert, like someone like yourself or someone in that field to really work individually with the family or with the child?
I would say anytime.
Yeah.
But if it seems really extreme, ask your
Uh-huh.
doctor for a referral, to a speech therapist, a feeding therapist, a dietitian. Maybe there's a gastrointestinal problem or something else that's going on. None of those, like, let's say that you get this assessment and you find out your child has a sensory processing issue or an allergy or a gastrointestinal issue. None of those would preclude you following the division of responsibility. It's still the gold standard for good feeding, but it might mean with a younger child that they have some kind of oral motor therapy to teach them how to chew differently or to get them used to different textures. There might be some things that they go to for in therapy, but at home, it's still important to keep that line from being crossed, where you start to pressure them to eat because almost across the board, it's this vicious cycle. My child doesn't eat, so I push even gently, and it makes them push back, both to maintain their autonomy and also because it's just unpleasant. Um, so it's that fine line where you want to be really supportive, do all you can to create that structure and opportunities, but then really hang back. And some kids will surprise you. They might, as kids get older, if they're very selective, they start to notice this and they start to be interested in maybe trying new things. And even then, you have to really step back because if a child has had a lot of bad experiences with food, they're going to assume every new experience is going to be bad. And so even if like your 10 or 11-year-old expresses like, oh, mom, I think I'd like to try this new brand, or I think I'd like to try crackers or something that's just not been their thing, let them lead, because as soon as you get into it, like, oh, my kid is so excited to try this new thing, I can't wait. And you buy it and then they're like, okay, I'm not ready. And then it becomes a power struggle or disappointment again. So it's always helpful to let your child lead while you provide that really firm structure and support.
That's great. Um, so if somebody wants to learn more about you, get in touch with you, see what you're up to, how do they do that?
You can visit my website and blog, healthylittleeaters.com. And I also have a Facebook page by that same name, Healthy Little Eaters.
And you mentioned at the beginning doing some things like, the blog and courses. Is that what they would find on your site?
I have no courses right now, but I
Uh-huh.
team up with another dietitian, Natalia Stasenko of Feeding Bites, and we're putting
Uh-huh.
together some stuff for this fall. And
Okay, great.
we also run a Facebook group together called Feeding Bites, Real Families, Real Meals, and that's a great way to get support from other families that are kind of trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. Finding other people in the same boat who are working the same pieces is definitely a useful place to go, because a lot of times as parents we feel off on an island by ourselves with some of this stuff. So,
I know it's so
that
nice to
that
have other
yeah,
parents there cheering you on and like, yes, I understand.
totally, totally. Well, I thank you so much for taking your time with us today. You shared some great stuff, some awesome wisdom with our listeners, and going to make some differences with for kids and with families. I think the biggest thing like I said, taking out of this is just really helping family meals, eating, and the children have less anxiety, less stress,
Yes.
and a healthier, better relationship with eating and with food and mealtime. Because we know, research tells us that how we are raised or how our experiences as children is most likely how we're going to raise our own kids. And so that's a big part of why I do this too, because we can create a legacy of change, as
Right.
parents make the steps to change for their kids will have an easier time with their kids and then their kids, so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate you giving your time and your expertise to us today. And, um, thanks.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, you take care. If you enjoyed this episode of Kids Eating Broccoli podcast, connect with us online. You can find us on Facebook at Kids Eating Broccoli Podcast or at Dr. Brad Ellisor DC. You can also go to our website, drellisor.com. That's DOCTORELLISOR.com. Go to iTunes and leave us a review and a rating, or on Stitcher. And be sure to keep in touch with us so you can hear the next episode. Sign up for our mailing list or like us on Facebook. You guys take care now, and let's make the next generation the best generation.